We read about the martyrs for Christ in Revelation 6, verses 9 to 11. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer, until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren, who would be killed as they were, was completed. Welcome to Souls Under the Altar, a program that reviews the stories of God's persecuted from the past and the present. Your host for this program is Etienne McClintock.
Dear listener, welcome to the program. Glad you've joined us again today. My special guest in the studio is Dr. Barry Harker, and this is the third program we are doing just to talk about the current environment we find ourselves in, political, social, and some of the unrest that we see around the world at the moment. This program is called Future Prospects. Now, leading up to this, we've looked at the ongoing rise of illiberal democracy. We've spoken about the deepening divisions in the US and a call for unity, and we're seeing that around the world. We see these idealisms from the French Revolution and the US Revolution actually clashing and pushing against each other. And we also see an intensification, obviously, of wars amongst people, cultural wars, cultural nationalism, and also Christian heritage. Now, do we have examples in countries at the moment where we can look to see how this is working out, how this is playing out at the moment?
Yes, I'd like to just have a look at the issue that have taken place in Poland just over 2017-2018 and look at how cultural nationalism and Christian heritage are working together and where it's going, but it's obviously going in a direction that is not particularly good or sensitive for religious minorities. Right. In Poland. So we'll do a case study.
Okay, that'll be great.
And then we can have a look at the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest movement in France, and what's the significance of all this unrest that we're seeing in France. And we'll look at the issues that the Gilets jaunes have, and we can see how this is feeding into this whole thing about the two different models of how the world should operate. Is it going to be equality above liberty or liberty above equality? And we're going to look at the beefs that the yellow vest movement has against the French government, and we will look at the implications for the rise of a new French right, like an alternative movement in France, because it's also tied very closely to Christian nationalism and cultural nationalism.
Wow.
And so we'll bring some of this together right up to date just to the last couple of weeks. In fact, the Gilets jaunes are still current. Still current,
That's right.
In France.
Okay, now that will be a very interesting discussion to have.
So let's start with the idea that it's not an easy time for democracies. And let's have a look at, for example, the situation in Poland. Now, the case study revolves around Sunday shopping. On November 24, 2017, the Polish lower house passed a bill to gradually phase out most Sunday shopping by 2020. The bill took effect on Sunday, March 11, 2018, limiting Sunday shopping to the first and last Sundays of the month during the remainder of 2018. But here's the rub. Non-compliance can not only lead to hefty fines, it can even lead to imprisonment.
Wow.
That's pretty serious.
And as far as the population in Poland is concerned, are they all in support of this? Is that a...
Well, no. The majority are actually wanting to keep the shops open. But the controversial legislation is backed by Poland's Catholic bishops and the influential Solidarity Trade Union. Archbishop Stanislaw Gadecki, who supported the ban during the initial public controversy over the proposal, told Polish radio, and I'm quoting, "Free Sundays are what all Catholics, non-Catholics and non-believers need."
They're not necessarily wanted, but according to him, they need it.
Yeah, they need it.
Okay.
So here you have an issue about a secular Sunday, a secular day of rest, compared with a religious day of rest. So while the two are mixed up, the Catholic bishops are in no doubt that everyone needs the Sunday. the Free Sunday.
So what would be influencing that kind of move there? I know that the Pope, 3 years or so now, wrote the Laudato Si, which actually deals with this issue of Sunday and how Sunday is a solution to the challenges we have with climate change, for example.
Yes.
Is that a part of the whole worldview that's pushing this kind of an approach?
Well, it is. When we come to the New French Right, for example, one of their major commitments is to Laudato Si, the Pope's encyclical on the environment and also the economy. So this is all interconnected. As the Pope said, everything's connected.
Yes.
So he has an interconnectedness thesis, but at the very heart of that interconnectedness thesis is the concept of Sunday. He says that Sunday joins heaven and earth. It joins rich and poor, north and south, east and west. And so he's really saying that Sunday is a touchstone for all of these major issues that are confronting the world.
So even the social issues like families get a time together. Parents aren't away working, they can spend a whole day together. All those factors, he's selling Sunday as a positive impact on all the woes that society is facing at the moment.
He is indeed. Well, society does need a day of rest. There is a case for workers' rights.
Yes.
There is a case for family time. There is a case for giving people time for recreation.
And shutting down the factories.
And renewal, shutting down the factories. You can probably also say there's a case for the environment. You know? Just if you shut the world down for a day a week, that takes the pressure off the environment. So there are lots of pressures, but when the bishops actually say free Sundays are what all Catholics, non-Catholics and non-believers need, it transcends not just the secular but also transcends the religious.
Yes, I can see
and of course that brings up the question of individual minority rights. And so if you look at Cardinal Gadecki, he's really pushing a line that says that everyone needs this. But when a bishop says it, he's really saying it's got a religious dimension as well.
Sure.
In fact, that's how the Christian Broadcasting Network saw it. This is from Christian Broadcasting Network News. Returning to the Bible, Poland reclaims Sunday as a day of rest. This is from the 28th of November 2017. And I'm quoting, they say, in the Old Testament, the Bible teaches that Sunday is a day of rest since God rested on the seventh day after creating the world. Sunday, the first day of the week, became the Catholic seventh day and a day of resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead on Sunday. So the Christian Broadcasting Network doesn't see it in secular terms, it sees it in quite explicit religious terms. Yes. So while it's appealing to the universal need for rest in support of a total ban on Sunday shopping, the bishops can't mask the fact that it's got a religious dimension to it. And this is what I'm saying, that when you start to play with the protections for minorities or act unconstitutionally or try to link church and state, even with ostensibly good reasons, then you're eventually going to come to the point of transgressing someone's human rights and religious rights.
Yeah. Wow. So you mentioned Christian heritage, and we're obviously going to talk about that further as we go through this, but they're arguing Christian heritage, which a Sunday is a part of, and espousing at the moment the social benefits of that. Yes. But as the bishops have actually got involved in the discussion and presented that, they've clearly connected it not just from a social perspective and a civil perspective, but definitely back to the religious, historical roots of Sunday observation,
that's right,
especially in Europe.
Yeah, so Poland's traditionally Catholic country. And so when you have a revival of Christian heritage, it's going to be Catholic heritage,
right,
basically, in that culture. So it's just a reminder that arguments for Christian heritage and cultural nationalism may include social benefits, but you have to be extremely cautious with that argument because you may find yourself acting unconstitutionally or denying constitutional protections to minorities. And basically that's what history tells us, that minority religions always suffer. And so the genius of liberal democracy is that it addressed that issue, gave everyone access to protection for their beliefs.
Okay.
And we know that works because people are trying to get into the liberal democracies, not out of them.
That is true.
And why are they trying to get into them? Because that's what they want.
And there's a level of prosperity under those freedoms, civil and religious freedoms, bring a level of prosperity you don't see in other idealistic organisations when it comes to, even if you look at communism.
Yes.
I mean, the pursuit there of happiness, the pursuit of excellence is taken away quite considerably because everybody's on a level playing field, and whether you work hard or whether you don't work, everybody gets the same.
That's right. If you shackle the mind, you're not going to get human flourishing.
That's right.
So you can't shackle people's minds. You have to give them freedom, and that's when the culture really flourishes. So we've looked at Poland, and we can see there that Christian heritage and cultural nationalism can easily move from a secular social benefit to a so-called religious one, which takes us back past the time of constitutional protection for religious minorities. And that's not a pretty place.
Yes, as we look at history, obviously there's an ugly picture that we see, but many people have lost sight of history. And as we said in the previous program, if we forget our history, we're destined to repeat the mistakes of the past. And our constitutions in the West in particular have protected us against those evils of the past and those persecutions of the past, and also the violation of rights of all people, in particular the minorities.
Now, in our first two programs, we actually just looked at the broad principles, but there's a case study of what we're saying, that as the democracy breaks down or goes under stress, immediately the rights of minorities are going to be questioned or challenged. And so this is a classic case study where that can go. Okay, so let's go now to the Gilets jaunes. Now, the genius of this movement, of course, is that everyone in France is required to have a yellow vest in the car. So if you break down on the freeway, you've got to take out your yellow vest and put it on. So if you're creating a revolutionary movement that you want to be highly visible and easily accessible, then you would use a yellow vest, wouldn't you?
You would, and that's what they've been doing.
so this is what we're seeing. We're actually seeing the Gilets jaunes movement, and it's actually a reaction. And this is what we've been talking about. We've been talking about the fact that if you push hard enough against people, that you will get a reaction. And with the Gilets jaunes, there are a number of beefs that they have. Now, this is a movement that was seemingly leaderless when it started. It was sparked by the rise in fuel prices, usually in regional areas, country areas of France, where they didn't have access to public transport, and they required, their vehicles, their diesel vehicles even, to travel and for employment purposes. And so this was the thing that really sparked it, because Emmanuel Macron put extra taxation on petrol and diesel, and of course that impacted on the cost of living for people in the regional areas in particular. They weren't so concerned about the environmental implications. In other words, they were not anti-environment in relationship to this. They just felt that they wanted equivalent contributions across the society. They didn't want to be the only ones who were bearing the burden of this. And so they're quite happy to have climate change mitigated in their minds, but they just wanted equivalent contributions across the society. They were also upset about the fact that when Emmanuel Macron came to power in 2017, he took taxation off the rich with the idea of creating economic opportunity and opportunities for employment in France. So he wanted to kickstart the economy. So he wanted to take the taxation off the rich, which he did. And of course, the Gilets jaunes got really upset about this, because they felt that the taxation should be restored, and if people were going to be paying for mitigation of climate change, the rich should be paying their fair share of this. So that was another beef that they had. They also felt that Macron was talking down to them, that he was elitist, and there were a couple of examples where that happened in public. And by the way, this whole movement spanned the left and the right. Now, this is highly significant, because we've been talking about the fact that if you've got a division, a wide division in society, sooner or later you're going to have to start attending to that division, because it can destroy your culture and your economy. And so you have to look for some source of unity that transcends the politics. And I believe that if you're going to do that in traditional Christian countries, and you're going to attend to cultural nationalism, eventually you will have to go back to those ideas, those religious ideas that were held in common that can act as a unifying point across the left and the right. So what you find with the Gilets Jaunes in France is that there's 75% support for this movement. That's massive.
75%?
75% support, wow. And that's spanning the political left and the political right. Think of that. Suddenly you have a movement that's got so much power that it can actually get the government to take the taxation off the petrol and to make other concessions in an effort to try to stop the demonstrations.
And it's bringing the left and
but
the
it's
right
still
together.
happening. This has been going on for 2 months.
Right.
But it's bringing the left and the right together in a common cause, in sympathy. So think of the implications if the Gilets Jaunes took this cultural clout that they have, this political, economic clout that they have at the moment, and said, okay, we want to go back. We want to go back to our culture. We want to go back to our Christian nationalism. What would happen then? Well, the government would be in an extremely difficult position. As we've seen in Poland, very quickly, even though the majority weren't in favour of Poland, the Polish government pressed ahead with the support of the bishops.
Yes. Wow.
So this is not an insignificant movement that's taking place. Now, this brings us to the whole question of a new development, and this is only just the last several weeks that I've really I've been getting across this topic. The French right. If you're in the centre of French politics and you move right, the first people you come across is the traditional Republicans. Now, it's interesting that in France, they have a traditional conception, particularly in the last 100 years, and there's a term for it, laicity, which is like a separation of church and state. And if you're a politician, you don't talk about your religion in public. But in the last French elections, presidential elections, François Fillon was the leading candidate. He's a Republican. And he basically lost out because he had been giving his wife money for non-existent work. So that scandal really took him out. But he was the front runner in the French elections.
Okay.
The other two were Marine Le Pen and also Emmanuel Macron. Well, Macron finally won out because people weren't prepared to go quite as right as Marine Le Pen. So as you're looking right, we go to the Republicans. Now, what Macron did was talk about his Catholicism, his own personal religion, and that was a bit of a breakthrough. That was a throwback to the past, and so he was getting a lot of support. And remember, at the time, prior to 2017, you had the immigration issues in Europe, particularly acute in France, as people are trying to cross the channel.
Yes. And
you also had the issues of the terrorist atrocities that were taking place at the time. So people are saying, okay, we've got to do something about this immigrant culture and this immigrant religion, and that means we have to appeal back to our cultural nationalism and we have to appeal to our Christian heritage. And so he was the perfect candidate at the time. Now, Marine Le Pen lost out to Emmanuel Macron, and she's on the far right, but there's a gap in the middle between the traditional Republicans, who are sort of right of centre, but not dramatically right of centre,
okay,
and Marine Le Pen, who is right at the extreme end of that spectrum, anti-immigrant and so forth. So in the middle, you have now an evolving right-wing popular front. Now, to give it a broader international focus, you have to look at Steve Bannon. Now, Steve Bannon was the chief White House strategist when Donald Trump first became president.
That's right, yeah.
Donald Trump pushed him out of the White House, but they're still obviously friends. But what that did for Europe was very interesting. Instead of having him tied up in the United States, he went to Europe and he starts what he calls the movement. So he's linking together, the right-wing parties in Europe. And we're particularly talking France, Italy, Hungary, Poland, Germany. And they're being resourced, they're being networked, and when you look at their goals, it's basically cultural nationalism and Christian heritage.
Wow.
That's underpinning this movement. So we're not just talking now about France, we're also talking about pan-Europe.
Yes.
And that becomes fairly significant.
So would Steve Bannon be working with Macron, or would he be working with Le Pen as far as his approach in, say,
Le Pen.
Le Pen.
Le Pen.
Okay, so extreme right.
Across the right, yeah. So, and this new movement that's starting is somewhere in the middle, so it's ostensibly centre-right. Now, the first time I heard about it, I was reading an article by Mark Liller called Two Roads for the New French Right. This came out of the New York Review of Books. This is really pretty current. It's only December 20, 2018. And he said it's a movement closely connected to the Catholic right in France and founded on the cultural, religious foundations of Europe. Think of it. When we've talked cultural nationalism and Christian heritage, he's talking about the same thing, only they term it cultural, religious foundations of Europe. By the way, Pope Francis talks about these foundations as well. And he says this movement is poised to create a new conservative movement in France. It's emerging. And I'm quoting now, this is Mark Liller's article. He says, something new is happening on the European right. Ideas are being developed and transnational networks for disseminating them are being established. Journalists have treated as a mere vanity project Steve Bannon's efforts to bring European populist parties and thinkers together under the banner of what he calls the movement, but his instincts, as in American politics, are in tune with the times. So let's have a look at what this movement is about. It's championed in France by young writers who share two convictions. The first is a robust conservatism, and the second is a commitment to environmentalism. And I'm quoting, they all seem inspired by Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, a comprehensive statement of Catholic social teaching on the environment and economic justice. So this new movement is really appealing to cultural nationalism and Christian heritage in Europe. But it's not just it's not just a French movement, it's a pan-European movement.
Right.
Although it might be kicking off more significantly here. Liller said, look, there's only two roads that this movement can take. The first one is a moderating force in the European democracies that are currently under stress.
Okay.
So it can either be a moderating one, but he said the second road that it can take is an aggressive form of conservatism that one also sees in France that would serve instead as a powerful tool for building a pan-European reactionary Christian nationalism. Pan-European, across Europe. Reactionary, right-wing. Christian nationalism, then it would be the Christian heritage of Europe, coming back strongly across Europe. Well, look at that as a movement and see, well, where is that potentially going to go in terms of religious liberty? The last time we had a powerful pan-European reactionary Christian nationalism, things were pretty rocky in Europe.
So, okay, there's two roads. There's obviously this one which will be a strong reaction to the left.
Yes.
And the other one is one that's more moderate, that brings people together and then just helps disperse some of this angst and some of this conflict and stress between these two ideologies.
Yes.
But if we look at the Bible, it sounds like there will be a strong reaction to what's happening from the left and that push there. And ultimately we'll see a strong response from these people if the movement under Steve Bannon and bringing these people together keeps on growing and has its effect.
We started this series of 3 discussions looking at Revelation 13 and 14, where you have a worldwide religious liberty crisis related to worship. So if you're going to have that take place, what would be the preconditions for a global religious crisis involving the United States, or maybe originating in the United States? 3 things. You'd have to have catastrophic divisions in the United States and Europe. Are we seeing catastrophic divisions in those 2 areas?
We're seeing significant divisions, yeah.
Then you have to have a point of unity that transcends culture. It has to transcend all these cultural identity, equality issues, but which draws on Christian heritage. So it has to have the capacity to transcend the culture, but also be part of it or emerge out of the culture. And the third point is that the point of unity has got to offer solutions to the concerns of both left and right. Interestingly, when we see the left and the right getting together in the Gilets Jaunes movement in France, we're seeing exactly that. So the preconditions for a global religious crisis are already with us. That is, catastrophic divisions in the US and Europe, need for a point of unity that transculture but which emerges out of it.
Yes.
This is what we saw in Poland. And the point of unity must offer solutions to the concerns of right and left. This is the Gilets Jaunes in France. So we are seeing the most dangerous conditions for religious liberty that the world has seen in many decades.
That is fascinating how you've drawn on, obviously, our worldview, which is modelled by Scripture and especially prophecy. And as we now look at what's happening in politics, which is happening in society, the push between the left and the right, between those ideologies that came through the French Revolution, that came through the US Revolution, how these clashing movements coming against each other now is actually bringing some sort of level of synergy, as we can see in France at the moment. And, of course, we have Steve Bannon now moving around in Europe trying to see if he can bring these people together to push against what's happening in the left. Now, hopefully it has a moderating influence, but ultimately we believe it will go beyond that and will actually be a strong backlash and a push against what's happened in the left.
So if you take a biblical view that there is going to be a crisis in the future, our future prospects don't look very good based on what's actually happening in the present. And, of course, these things have intensified over 2018, and I imagine that by the end of 2019, they're going to have either resolved or intensified tremendously more than they have in 2018. So a very significant time. It's time for us all to understand biblical prophecy, and it's time for us all to understand our need for God, because God is the only source of support if we were to go through times in which these events were to take place that have been prophesied. So it's Sunday in America, tells us the basic, the outlines of where it's going for the future, where the movements are taking us, what God is like. It says only God is able to take you safely through those times that lie in the future.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barry Harker, for coming and sharing your research and your material from your books with us. Dear listener, you can have access to these books by getting in touch with us or going online to 3abnaustralia.org.au. We'll share the contact details with you. And then also you can have these books. They are available online. They are available on Kindle as well. And the first book is called It's Sunday in America, and it's a timely warning about the emerging threats to religious liberty in the world's greatest democracy. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to catching up with you next time. Until then, God bless.
Thank you for joining us on Souls Under the Altar. If you'd like more information about today's program, or if you have any questions, please contact 3ABN Australia Radio by phoning 0249733456, or you can send an email to radio@3abnaustralia.org.au. You can also contact us on our 3ABN Australia Radio Facebook page. We'd love to hear from you.